Sorry to hog the question time, Jeff, but I'm really interested in the game theory and using games in education, and I was just wondering, there seems to be an element of moral panic around games and their corrupting effects on children and things like that. I'm wondering what you think about that, and if there's any precedents in educational technology prior to Web 2.
I'm not sure whether you're referring to the corruption of young people, where you actually put them at the center of something and encourage them to do something complex and actually interact with other people. I'm not sure whether that's the corruption you're referring to.
Yeah, when you put it like that, that's not my point of view, but there seems to be a lot of debate around whether or not the technology is productive and or can be potentially productive and useful in that environment. I'm wondering if that relates to maybe the assessment 1.5 area that you mentioned previously, and if they're about resistance to the use of technology in education more generally, I guess.
Yeah, I know, and certainly we could have a long discussion about that, about what people think about this. I think the issue really is to come up with some good examples for people, and not necessarily to concentrate on the things that might, I mean, you can always find negative examples of things. And I think one of our roles as educators is actually to come up with positive and useful examples of these things to show how they can be used. It's like anything. Anything can be misused or put to trivial use. But part of what we're trying to do is to say, okay, how do you use these things for a much more positive, higher level, productive activity? So I guess my take on all this is really just, I much prefer to concentrate on the positive things and then show some good examples to people rather than keep concentrating on the negatives. Okay, what I want to do now is just start moving on to looking at some examples of things. So what I've got up here on this slide is just, this happens to be from Moodle, it doesn't matter, it's just from a typical learning management system or a virtual learning environment, depending on where you are in the world, and looking at what's available to us now. Because we can always say, gee, we'd like people to build us something, and then when they do, we'll use it in the future. But one of the realities is we do have things at the moment. Most of our institutions have already committed to some particular environment, and although we might change that environment, I mean, that's fine, but we do need to look at what can we do with current technology as well as what do we need to build for the future. And so one of the things we've been doing is saying, well, okay, how do you use current technology to be able to do something more interesting, more innovative, and more useful in terms of e-assessments? I'm going to start at a very low level, and then we'll start moving up to something a bit more sophisticated. So what I'm going to start, and again, some of you have heard me talk about this before, so I'm not going to spend too long on this till we move on to some of the other things, but it's important to talk about what you can do right now at a fairly reasonably low level in terms of technology. And one of the things we've been looking at is how do you make e-assessment interactive, much more interactive, and ask more sophisticated questions of students, but using the technology that we currently have, and using technology that most teachers and academics would be familiar with. And I guess I just wanted to put this slide up to say what do I mean by interactive. The idea here is that you can set a question for students using whatever learning management system you currently have, and that you can incorporate an interactive tool into that, so that they have to use the tool to be able to then just make their normal response that they would in your learning management system. But the point is they've gone off and done something with an interactive tool, which means you can actually change the type of question that you've asked, that you're going to ask of students. So what we'll do is just have a quick look at an example of that. So here in a static slide, what I've got is a typical question. This is a multiple choice question, so let's start right at the bottom end and say that we've got a multiple choice question. So the technology associated with this is very simple, and what we've done is incorporated. I'll put the still image here, but you wouldn't even have to do this. This is a static image, but we'll go and have a look at a video in a minute of what this would look like, of putting in a link inside the question in your learning management system. So what we've done is put a hypertext link in here, and when the student clicks on that, a second window will open up in their browser. So they've got two windows open, and they can toggle between those two windows. So in terms of the technology, it's very simple. You can do this right now. And yes, it's very much like a web quest approach. and what they can do is the students can explore something. In this particular case, what we've got is a QuickTime virtual reality image. So what the student is being asked to do here is move around inside this image and identify something. So don't worry too much about the question. We just set it up as an example. But the idea here is to say, okay, how could you ask a question of students where it doesn't rely just on memory, but relies on them examining a three-dimensional object and moving around that three-dimensional object, and then saying what's the relative relationship between those things in the three-dimensional objects. Now, you can use this type of technology in just about any discipline. This second example, which is coming up, is one, and I will go out and probably show this one as a video. This is instead of using multiple choice question, this is a discussion board that you might want to set up for students. And in this case, we've incorporated a link to a QuickTime virtual reality image of the biotapestry. Why the biotapestry? And I'll just go through and explain this because I think this is quite a good example of what we're trying to say here about incorporating relatively simple tools into questions in current learning management systems, which actually allow you to do much more than the current system would normally allow you to do. Here we've put a link into the biotapestry because the original to the biotapestry is 70 meters long. That 70 meters means that you can't give a static image to the students of the biotapestry because there'd be no detail in there. So what most people would normally do is give them a segment of the biotapestry. And so exactly as you can see on this slide here, you've got a short segment out of that. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is that every student gets the same segment, which means the type of question that you're going to be able to ask students is restricted to that particular segment. You can't ask a question where the students can then choose the segment that they would like to use to be able to elaborate their response. So simply by turning it around, turning the issue around from the student's perspective and saying, well, okay, we'll give you the whole 70 meters of the biotapestry. You can scan that in real time while you're trying to do the assessment task. You pick the scenes that you want to use to be able to elaborate a particular point. Right? So again, it's a very simple idea. The technology to do this is very simple. You could go away and do this right now in any of your learning management systems. We've got examples on our Transforming Assessment website of things like the biotapestry, things like churches. You can go inside a church or any type of structure. It could be a museum, it could be a mine, it could be a factory floor, it could be a schoolroom, it could be what am I thinking of? Archaeological site, right? Anywhere where you want a student to move around inside a three-dimensional object. Yes, Matthew's just talked about the virtual hospital in Second Life. Any of these objects where you can move around inside a three-dimensional object. The issue, though, of say Second Life, and we will show some examples of that in a minute, is that if you do something in Second Life, the learning curve to be able to build things in Second Life is very steep. And so one of the issues there is you often need specialists to be able to help you to be able to do this. What we've been doing with academics is trying to show them, certainly from the technological point of view, very simple things that they could do now with resources that exist right now that they actually don't have to build, and then how they might incorporate those into their current systems. So what we might do is just go out and have a bit of a look at one of these. So just give me a minute, and I'm just going to go to some more slides here.
Welcome to our